Hey there, fellow classic comic collectors. As always, I'm Scott Harris King, and today it's all been building up to this. It's the last part of my complete Doctor Strange run. We started back in 1963 with Strange Tales 110. We went through the whole series of Strange Tales, all of Doctor Strange Volume 1, all of his series in Marvel Premiere, all of Doctor Strange Volume 2 up until issue 75. And now, the final part, we've got Doctor Strange 76 to 81, and then Strange Tales 1 to 19. Now, I mentioned in the last video, yes, on the face of it, it's a little odd to stop at issue 75 when the series goes to 81, but I wanted to lump these all together for a couple reasons. Actually, just one reason, is because most of this is all one storyline, written by Peter B. Gillis. Now, at the time I'm recording this, Peter B. Gillis just passed away a couple weeks ago, and I just wanted to talk a little bit about his work. I first encountered him right when I first started buying comics, and I was just sort of buying everything. Just didn't know what any of the titles were. Wanted to just try everything out. And one book that I read off and on was New Defenders. So he took over Defenders right towards the end of the series. They had this new direction, and I had a couple issues here and there that I read, and then I got like the last like 6 or 7 issues of Defenders before it was canceled. So those were weird. Peter B. Gillis had a very different sort of writing style and aesthetic from most of his peers, particularly compared to other stuff going on in Marvel in the 80s, like compared to other like shooter writers. He's very idiosyncratic and really stood out. He also, the other series that I read from him at the same time was, I was a really big fan of Micronauts. And he was the writer on the new Micronaut series. I got in pretty early on that. That only ran 20 issues, but that was another Peter B. Gillis story. So read both of those. And then I read a couple of these, and we'll get into that now. He also was responsible for Strike Force Morituri, which I didn't read at the time. But you can see that he had a lot of the really quirky, offbeat, weird series and stories. They weren't simple books. He had some complex ideas in them. And I think he's really underrated. But let's just jump into his Doctor Strange run here and get into it, because this run is awesome. I mentioned it last time, but out of this 25-year block of Doctor Strange that I have collected, this is my second favorite, or it's the one that I think is sort of second best. Ditko remains the standard, and his classic, Eternity storyline, but this is a close second for me. Yes, I rate this above the Roger Stern era, which I just talked about, which I love, and I also rate it even above the Englehart Brunner era. I love this storyline. So let's get into it. Doctor Strange 76 is his first issue, but things really kick off in the next issue. It's 77. So, starting in this issue, there's a storyline where basically there's an evil sorcerer. That's the guy on the cover here, or something like that. I'm actually confusing myself a little bit, because there's a guy on a later cover that's also sort of involved with this. The important part is this. He gets challenged for the title of Sorcerer Supreme, and he gets attacked by this incredibly powerful sorcerer who wants to become the Sorcerer Supreme for the whole dimension. And he wrecks a bunch and steals and or wrecks a bunch of Doctor Strange's various artifacts, and he seriously injures some of Doctor Strange's supporting cast. And what happens over the course of this storyline, here's 78, is Doctor Strange basically loses the fight, and in order to win and save his friends and everything, he gets mortally injured here, and he sends his soul into her body, and sort of becomes uses her as his vessel to continue the battle, which, spoiler alert, she does not appreciate. Um, and then we see in issue 80, he has to, the supernatural injury, he has to like guide the surgeons and then fight psychically. So there's this whole storyline, some of which was used in the first Doctor Strange movie. But the upshot is, in order to beat this guy, he ends up having to use black magic. Here's the last issue of the original run, 81. And so he uses black magic and beats the guy, but in doing so corrupts himself. And that's where the series ends. But it doesn't, the storyline doesn't stay ended for long. Not long at all, because as you can see, this is cover dated February. And then if we jump ahead, it was bi-monthly, right? February, March, here's April. And Doctor Strange is now appearing in a new Strange Tales split book with Cloak and Dagger. I find this a little bit strange. I don't really know what's going on here. Doctor Strange has been bi-monthly for like the whole title. So 81 issues, but it took like over 10 years to put them out. And at the end of that, they went to the split book, staying bi-monthly, splitting with Cloak and Dagger. So it definitely seems like sales must have been an issue, I guess. Here's what the weird part is. I'll talk a little bit more about this at the end, is that at the end of this series, which only lasted for a year and a half, Doctor Strange got his own title again, but it was monthly. Now, I don't think that the sales on this, and I don't have any of the numbers, were like so much better than the previous series that it justifies suddenly getting his monthly title. So it feels like kind of a weird choice. I don't really know what went into canceling the series, launching this, then relaunching as the monthly series. It just doesn't, the math just doesn't add up for me on any of that. I feel like there's something else going on with this. But for whatever reason, we get the Strange Tales. Now, I read this first issue off the stands, and I didn't get the rest of them. And I think the issue for me was that I don't give a crap about Cloak and Dagger. I didn't then, I don't now. Also, the Cloak and Dagger issues have art by Brett Blevins, and I am not a fan. So basically, I had this book where I was interested in half of it, and it was also, since it was bi-monthly, I don't think I was really remembering what was going on. I was buying like 35 comics a month at this point. And so after this first issue, I dropped it. But when I put this run back together about 10 years ago or whatever, and finally got the rest of the series, which is dirt cheap and worth nothing. Here's issue 2. I finally read this storyline, and I love it. Now, this split books is actually, the way they do it is very similar to the way they did it in the 60s. So these first few issues, we have the split covers. Doctor Strange has the little feature on both of these, right? Which is how it used to be in Strange Tales originally. You know, the first part of Strange Tales, he wasn't on the cover at all. Then he got these little spotlights like he is here, and eventually they alternated who was on the cover. Well, Little Strange in issue 3, and then, what do you know, issue 4, he's not on the cover. But he does get the cover of issue 5. So they sort of go back and forth, but not exactly. There doesn't seem to actually be quite as uniform a strategy for this. Now, let me tell you what the story is about, because this is where this gets really good. Doctor Strange, like I said, he had to use black magic, so he's corrupted himself. And what he discovers is he starts to lose the ability to use white magic. He can't command the spells that he used to command, because he's been corrupted by the black magic. And so he starts losing his powers. And at the same time, he discovers a threat from the classic super powered Marvel stand-in for Cthulhu, Shumagorath, who he had first fought way back in those Marvel Premiere issues that we talked about. And so he's got this thing where he needs to protect the universe from Shumagorath, but he can't because he's losing his powers. So it's very clear that Peter B. Gillis went back and read all of those Strange Tales issues, because what he ends up doing is he ends up meeting up with his old enemy, Klatuu. And Klatuu is a guy who used black magic, and his storyline was basically, and I'm going way back because it's been so long since I read this, but I'm pretty sure that his origin was tied into the origin of the Ancient One. So Klaatu is also incredibly old, very powerful, and he was sort of like the black magic version of the Ancient One, and the Ancient One defeated him. And so he showed up in this one storyline in Strange Tales, and Doctor Strange defeated him. But so Doctor Strange is basically like, I need to know how to use black magic. And so he becomes Klaatu's apprentice, and Klaatu teaches him how black magic works. And I absolutely love this storyline. Now we have Stephen Strange. He's back as an apprentice. He's doing these morally gray things. We learn a lot more about Klaatu, because it turns out, like, yes, he's a black magic guy. He was the villain, but he's not as evil as he seemed. It's one of these things where once you get his story and get things from his perspective, actually, he makes a little bit of sense. And so he's helping teach Doctor Strange how to channel black magic instead. So here's issue 6. And so over the course of this story, Doctor Strange sort of falls deeper and deeper into black magic, and he's sort of being more corrupted, losing more of his soul, doing more questionable things in the name of the greater good. Issue 7, we see we have everybody in one story together. You also notice it says the New Defenders. So this is the only part of the storyline that for me doesn't quite work as well, is that at the end of the Defender series, the Defenders all seem to die in this big magic thingy. What's it? They all sacrifice themselves. But in this storyline, like their ghosts come back and stuff. And so there's some stuff here where he's basically trying to tie up some loose ends from New Defenders. When that was canceled, he wrapped things up as best he could, but obviously he's still working on some of the loose ends that he had left from that. And I get it, but their element is the one thing in this that doesn't quite work for me. Here's issue 8. Kevin Nolan does some of these covers. I'm not sure he did this one. Oh, he did. Okay. I know there's some people that are really big fans of Kevin Nolan, which I understand, but I am not one of them. Here's issue 9 with a Doctor Strange cover. Number 10, where Dagger gets this very sort of 80s, where she looks like Boom Boom. This look is absolutely terrible. 11, you can kind of see here, these don't even have Cloak, it's just Dagger. So you can kind of see that on almost all of these covers, Doctor Strange is still getting second billing. So for whatever reason, they seem to think that Cloak and Dagger is the big draw in this series, which is another thing that's probably turning me off, because I don't like Cloak and Dagger, and I didn't like the artist working on Cloak and Dagger, and Doctor Strange just seemed to be sort of like second fiddle, which again makes it so strange to me that when this series ended, Doctor Strange gets a monthly series. Cloak and Dagger, I don't remember if they got their own series or not, but if they did, it ended very quickly. So whatever was going on in Cloak and Dagger, it turns out they're actually not that popular, and so they disappear, but Doctor Strange gets a monthly title that goes on for the next 10 years more, and does much better. So I don't know, I don't really understand. Here's 13. Again, Doctor Strange not even on this cover. It's got Cloak and Dagger, Power Pack, and the Punisher, but no Doctor Strange. And so the story continues, and eventually Doctor Strange becomes a master of black magic, and he goes to fight Shumagorath. And there's this really awesome story where he's basically descending through these different levels of reality and facing stronger and stronger opponents. Here he is battling Klatuu in issue 15. I don't remember why this happens, but it's important to the story. Kevin Nolan on the cover there, 16. And so as Doctor Strange goes further and further down, he starts, he's fighting all these different creatures. There's like this weird, like, yeah, you don't see any of this stuff on the cover, but there's like this weird, like, dark elf that he fights. And there's other monsters, and as he defeats them, he absorbs them into himself. If that sounds familiar, because they use that as in the Doctor Strange stuff in the What If cartoon series, and that version of the evil Doctor Strange eventually appeared in one of the second Doctor Strange movie as well. But they took that idea of him battling these different creatures and absorbing them and sort of gaining his powers. That came from this storyline. And so eventually, by the time he gets to Shumagorath, he's sort of leveled up over and over by absorbing all these things. And then he's like, that he takes on some of their characteristics. So like he has an eye patch and he's got like long blonde hair. And so he's only like only part of him is still Doctor Strange, but he's sort of holding this thing together as this sort of new creature that's an amalgam of all of their powers. And then at the end, he faces off against Shumagorath and defeats him. This is issue 17. And the end of that story is in issue 18. So basically we get like the last 5 issues of Doctor Strange and then 18 issues of Strange Tales, which are split books. So it's equivalent of 9 issues of stories. So in terms of the length of the story, it's the equivalent of about a 14-issue epic where Doctor Strange is forced to embrace black magic and battle Shumagorath. And I love this story. There's still 1 issue left of the series, which is 19, and this just has a little epilogue in it, which is mostly unrelated to the rest of the story. And that's the end. After that issue came out, they canceled the series, but then they immediately relaunched the new Doctor Strange. And so basically there's not really a break in the publishing. It's just the numbering with Doctor Strange is all over the place, right? Because he had a series that started with issue 110, went to 183, then was in Marvel Premiere 3 to 14, his own series 1 to 81, this 1 to 19, and then another 1 to 81. And it's mostly all one storyline. But they just, they were ahead of themselves and screwing with the numbering and everything. Again, I don't really understand why they canceled the series and then relaunched it like that. But for whatever reason, they did. So just, I don't have the new series. Now, I have read them at one point. The first 4 issues of the Doctor Strange series that follows this is still written by Peter B. Gillis, and it basically ties up the Defender stuff. It's a storyline where those Defenders are finally brought back to life in physical form. They're no longer ghosts or whatever they were in this storyline. And then after those 4 issues, he leaves. Issue 5, Roy Thomas comes back, takes over the book, and he has a really long run on Doctor Strange starting there. That issue 5 is actually where I started reading the series again. So I had missed almost this whole storyline originally and then picked it back up when Roy Thomas took over with Doctor Strange number 5. But I didn't stick with it too long, only about a year before I gave up. The Roy Thomas era, I can't really speak too much about it because I haven't read it, but it was a little bit too sort of, middling, superhero adjacent, standard Marvel stuff, which this story I just talked about is absolutely not. So I love this storyline, highly underrated, dirt cheap. these Strange Tales issues, I mean, I haven't been looking for them for a long time, but you used to be able to find them in quarter bins everywhere, and I think you probably still can. Totally worth picking up. I love it so much. So that's it for this time. And next week we'll talk about something else. I'm not quite sure what my next video is going to be. I'm hoping to go to a convention over the weekend. If I do that, then we might have a convention report from that, or a haul, or whatever. But I wanted to mention that next Wednesday I'm launching my new Kickstarter. Finally putting out my romance comic, Geek Love #1. So I'll be doing a live stream Wednesday night to kick off that, where I'll show some of the covers. I have a bunch of variant covers that are homages to different classic romance comics. I'll be showing off some romance comics that inspired those covers and other things in it. Be talking just a lot about romance comics. So if you're a fan of romance comics, stop on by. It'll be Wednesday night, I don't know, 8 or 9, but there'll be a link somewhere on my page for it. So I'll see you then.